My name is Nina. I am 32 years old, and on the day they lowered my husband Michael into the ground, I stood utterly alone in a place where no one who should have loved me had chosen to show up. The soft drizzle of rain mixing with my tears as strangers with pitying eyes surrounded me, their sympathetic glances cutting deeper than knives, because they only reminded me of the absence of the people I had always expected to be there. My parents, my sister Rachel, even Jessica, my so-called best friend since childhood, all of them absent. All of them having chosen to attend my sister's glittering engagement party instead of standing by me in the darkest hour of my life. As the shovel struck the earth and clumps of dirt fell heavily on the wooden casket that contained the body of the man who had been my anchor, my best friend, and the only person who ever loved me without condition, my phone buzzed in my trembling hand, the screen lighting up with a message from my mother. "We need to talk now," followed by a sickening sight of 22 missed calls, as though urgency could be conjured in retrospect, as though their absence at Michael's funeral could be erased by digital noise. In that moment, I wondered what anyone would do in my position. How would you stand when everyone you loved had abandoned you? When the man who held you together was gone, and the people who gave you life treated your grief as an inconvenience? To explain how I reached that cemetery, I need to tell you about Michael and how he changed everything for me, starting with the afternoon in our sophomore year at college when he literally bumped into me in the library, sending my heavy stack of psychology textbooks scattering across the floor in a chaotic rain of pages and bindings. Unlike most people, who might have muttered a quick apology and hurried away embarrassed, Michael knelt on the floor with me, gathering every single book carefully, checking to see if any had been bent or damaged, his expression a mix of sincerity and warmth. When he handed the stack back to me, he didn't just walk away. He smiled and insisted on making it up to me by buying me a coffee. That coffee led to a dinner the following week, which turned into a late-night movie, which turned into study sessions, which turned into a romance that stretched through college and blossomed into 5 years of marriage. 5 years that, though brief, were the happiest of my life. Yet, from the very beginning, my family resisted and disapproved of Michael in every possible way. Not because he wasn't good to me, not because he lacked integrity or ambition, but because he was not the man they had imagined for me. He was from a working-class family, his father a mechanic, his mother a nurse, both decent, hard-working people who had instilled in him values of perseverance, kindness, and responsibility. To my parents, who valued wealth and social status above all else, Michael was an outsider, almost as if he came from another planet. "You could do so much better, Nina," my mother would often say, her tone dripping with disappointment whenever his name was mentioned. "Think about your future. He will never be able to give you the lifestyle you deserve." My father was even more blunt, dismissing Michael as a boy who had no connections, no money, nothing to bring to the table except debt. But they could not see what I saw. Michael was brilliant, completing his engineering degree with honors while working part-time to pay his bills. He was compassionate, spending his weekends volunteering at an animal shelter. He was loyal, patient, and endlessly supportive of my dreams. To me, he had everything that mattered, and I refused to measure my happiness by my parents' shallow standards. When we married, we paid for the wedding ourselves, determined not to owe them anything because their financial help always came with strings and shame. They came, of course, sitting stiffly, their disapproval radiating like a cold draft. Rachel scrolled through her phone the entire reception, rolling her eyes at the modest decorations, whispering cruel comments about the food. And Jessica, my maid of honor, smiled and performed her role, but I noticed even then how often she gravitated to Rachel's table, as though her loyalty was slowly shifting. Despite their scorn, Michael and I built a life together that was small by their standards, but enormous in love. We bought a modest apartment, both worked full-time, me as a marketing coordinator, him as a project engineer at a renewable energy firm, and filled our days with laughter, with weekend adventures, with whispered plans for the future. Children, a yard, a dog, all the ordinary dreams that seemed extraordinary because we would build them together. But with each year that passed, the divide between my family and my marriage grew sharper. Family dinners became battles of subtle insults, criticisms of our apartment size, digs about Michael's job, constant comparisons to Rachel, who was endlessly praised for her prestigious law career, her wealthy boyfriends, her social circle of influence. My mother would look at me and ask, "When are you giving us grandchildren?" Only to turn to Rachel minutes later and reassure her, "Take your time, sweetheart. Focus on your career. Children can wait." The double standards were blatant, infuriating, but I learned to swallow my protests, to endure. While under the table, Michael would squeeze my hand, silently reminding me that I was enough. Jessica, too, had witnessed all of this over the years. She had been with me through childhood birthdays overshadowed by Rachel's recitals, through high school when my parents forgot my graduation but lavished praise on Rachel's dance competitions, through Christmases when Rachel unwrapped expensive jewelry while I received practical items like sweaters and books. "Your family is tough," Jessica once admitted, trying to comfort me, "but they love you in their way." I nodded, even though deep down I knew it wasn't true. What I didn't realize at the time was that Jessica herself had slowly begun to internalize my family's perspective, that I was less deserving, that my feelings and milestones were somehow always less important, that Rachel was the sun and I was just expected to orbit. Then, 6 months ago, our life shattered when Michael, who had been complaining of headaches and fatigue, collapsed during a morning run. The diagnosis was swift and devastating. Stage 4 brain cancer, 6 months with treatment, less without. I called my parents, my voice trembling with terror, and heard my mother sigh and suggest a second opinion, her words casual as though I were overreacting. "Doctors exaggerate," she said, before pivoting to Rachel's latest relationship news. My heart broke a little more, though I wasn't surprised. When I told Jessica, she wept and promised to help, to be there. But as weeks passed, she too vanished into excuses. Michael endured the brutal treatments with unimaginable courage, his body deteriorating while his spirit still shined. I took leave from work, drained our savings, became his caregiver, his advocate, his nurse, his everything, even as my family's absence grew louder with every unanswered message, every empty promise. Rachel never visited. My parents came once for half an hour. Jessica appeared twice and fled quickly. And all the while, Michael's own family uprooted their lives to be with us, to hold vigil, to support me, to prove what true family looks like. As Michael grew weaker, Rachel's engagement became the centerpiece of my parents' lives. They called, brimming with excitement over venues, caterers, and gowns. And when I explained that Michael had only weeks left, that I could not leave him, my mother's reply was cold. "Your sister only gets engaged once. Surely Michael would understand if you left him for one evening." But I could not. I would not. I clung to him as though by sheer force of love I could keep him here longer, even as I knew time was slipping through my fingers like water. That was the moment I realized just how alone I truly was and how devastatingly expendable I had always been to them. Michael slipped away quietly at 3:27 a.m., the morphine drip humming steadily, his hand growing colder in mine and in his mother's as the nurse whispered that he was finally comfortable. And I sat there stunned, trying to reconcile the stillness of his chest with the 5 years of laughter, late-night whispered dreams, and ordinary mornings that had been my lifeline. His final words to me, "Thank you for loving me," replayed on a loop in my head as dawn crept through the blinds, and I found myself dialing the funeral home we had reluctantly chosen weeks earlier, my voice robotic as I answered questions about caskets, urns, and viewing arrangements, tasks that felt obscene in their practicality when my heart was disintegrating. Michael's parents hovered close, their grief heavy but dignified, holding me upright when my body threatened to collapse as staff arrived to take his body away, the sound of the stretcher wheels echoing in the hallway like a cruel drumbeat. I texted my family. "Michael passed away this morning. Funeral Tuesday. Details to follow." My father responded first. "Sorry for your loss. We will be thinking of you today." The distance in those words more painful than silence. My mother's reply came next. "Such sad news. Let us know about the funeral. Busy day ahead with party preparations. Rachel sent nothing at all, just an absence more cutting than any insult. Jessica messaged privately, promising she would be there early to help set up, bring coffee, be by my side. Words that, for the first time in days, made me feel a flicker of hope that someone from my past life would stand beside me. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of grief and logistics. Selecting Michael's burial clothes, the blue suit he wore at our wedding, now loose against his once strong frame, approving an obituary that read like a cruel summary of a life that deserved volumes, choosing a simple wooden casket for the viewing, and a blue ceramic urn to hold his ashes, its glaze the same shade as the water at Lake Michigan where he had asked me to scatter some of him. Every choice carved another wound into me, yet I forced myself to keep going because Michael would have wanted dignity in his final send-off. Tuesday dawned gray and drizzly, the world mourning with me, and I arrived at the funeral home dressed in a plain black dress, makeup barely disguising my exhaustion. Michael's parents were already there, his mother hugging me fiercely, whispering, "We are here for you today and always." And I nodded, clinging to her warmth. I checked my phone, 8:15 a.m., no sign of Jessica. 8:30, still no Jessica. At 8:45, the funeral director approached gently, offering me a private moment before guests arrived, and I followed him into the quiet room where Michael lay in the casket. Flowers from his coworkers and friends arranged carefully around him, but nothing from my family, not even a card. I stood over him, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers, whispering the words I had said to him every night, "I love you more than yesterday, less than tomorrow," and tried to memorize his stillness, to capture some fragment of him I could carry. By 9 o'clock, guests began to arrive. His coworkers, his college roommate who had flown in from Seattle, our neighbors, even volunteers from the animal shelter where he had spent weekends. They hugged me, cried with me, shared stories about his kindness and brilliance, each memory both balm and blade. By 9:30, I knew the truth. Jessica was not coming, and neither were my parents or Rachel. The seats I had reserved for them in the front row remained glaringly empty as the service began at 10 o'clock. The celebrant speaking beautifully about Michael's life, about his contributions to renewable energy, about his character. His boss stood and spoke of Michael's work ethic and how his projects would continue to impact communities for decades. When it was my turn to speak, my legs nearly buckled, the weight of absence pressing on me like an iron cloak. But I unfolded the paper in my hands and spoke through tears about the man who had shown me what unconditional love meant, who had been my greatest joy and my fiercest ally. The words came haltingly at first, then steadier, carried by the faces of the people who had loved him, even if they were not my family. As the service concluded, my phone buzzed with a social media notification, and though I should have ignored it, grief makes masochists of us all, so I looked, and there it was, a photo of my parents, Rachel, and Jessica, beaming at an engagement brunch, champagne flutes raised, hashtags celebrating love and family. My stomach dropped. While I was picking burial clothes, they were sipping mimosas. While I was writing an obituary, they were posing in designer dresses. The timestamp revealed the truth. This was no one-night party, but a multi-day celebration. My world shrank in that moment, fury and despair consuming me. After the service, we drove in a small procession to the cemetery, rain misting down, the city blurring through my tears. At the graveside, I stood at the edge while Michael's casket was lowered, whispering again, "I love you more than yesterday, less than tomorrow," as the first shovel of dirt hit the wood. My phone lit up again. "We need to talk now," from my mother, followed by 22 missed calls. I turned the device off, unable to bear the hypocrisy of their sudden urgency. Back at my empty apartment, the silence pressed against me like a living thing. Michael's parents offered to stay, but I needed solitude, needed to walk through rooms that still smelled of him, to press my face into his pillow, to touch his clothes, to grieve without eyes on me. When I finally turned my phone back on, it violently vibrated with messages. My mother: "So sorry we couldn't make it. Rachel wasn't feeling well. Please call. We are worried." My father: "We wanted to be there but couldn't disappoint Rachel's fiancé's family by leaving brunch early. Let us know about arrangements." Jessica: a flurry of increasingly desperate texts. "I overslept. I'm so sorry. I'll explain. Please let me come over." Rachel: a single message. "Sorry about Michael. Hope the funeral went okay." I felt hollow reading them, too exhausted to respond. Then an email arrived from Timothy, one of Michael's colleagues. "You should see this. I'm so sorry." Attached was a video he had recorded at the Grand Hotel during a business lunch, capturing my family and Jessica celebrating Rachel's engagement on the terrace. Rachel stood, glass in hand, thanking everyone for celebrating despite my sister's drama, dismissing Michael's illness as a distraction, laughing about how I always make everything about me. My mother patted her arm in agreement. My father nodded. Jessica chimed in about me exaggerating my importance, mocking my grief, mocking the man who had just died. The laughter cut through me sharper than any blade. I watched the video twice, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. They hadn't just been absent, they had chosen to celebrate instead of mourn, to mock instead of comfort, to laugh while I begged them to stand beside me. That night, my mother sent another message. "We need to talk about the family trust. Some amendments require your signature." Even in my rawest grief, something in me snapped into clarity. I would not be manipulated again. I called Susan, a kind colleague, and asked if her husband, Richard, an estate attorney, could review the documents. His voice was firm. "Do not sign anything. This amendment removes you from the trust entirely, redirecting everything to Rachel. They need your signature because the original agreement gave you equal share. They are trying to cut you out while you're vulnerable." The cruelty of it staggered me. They had skipped my husband's funeral to toast Rachel, mocked me on video, and now sought to erase me financially? My grief was suddenly braided with rage, a fire that told me the illusion of family I had clung to all these years was dead, and I was finally ready to bury it alongside the man who had always seen my worth. The morning after Michael's funeral, when grief should have been my only burden, my doorbell rang precisely at 11 o'clock, and through the security camera I saw them, my parents, Rachel, and Jessica, clustered together on my porch, faces carefully arranged into masks of concern, Rachel impatiently scrolling her phone, Jessica shifting awkwardly as though she already knew she didn't belong. And I knew then that this was not a visit born of compassion, but of calculation. I opened the door only enough to make it clear they were not welcome inside. But my mother swept past me anyway, as though entitlement could override grief, her voice falsely sweet. "We've been trying to reach you for days. We're worried about you," she said, her eyes sharp, not soft, while my father patted his leather briefcase like it was the true reason they had come. "Michael has been dead for exactly 24 hours, I said flatly, and Rachel rolled her eyes from the couch, sighing. "We all knew he was sick for months. You've had plenty of time to prepare." The cruelty of her casual dismissal hitting me harder than any physical blow. Jessica lingered by the door, unable to meet my gaze, and when I finally said, "Why are you here?" my father cleared his throat and replied, "There's some family business to finalize, just a small matter of updating paperwork. It won't take long." I stared at the briefcase, understanding instantly that they had come not to console, but to coerce, to push me into signing away my inheritance under the pretense of concern. "The trust documents that disinherit me?" I asked, my tone calm but icy, and their faces flickered with shock that I knew, my mother snapping, "Those are private family documents. You had no right—" And I cut her off, my voice shaking, like you had no right to skip my husband's funeral for a party. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Rachel broke it with a laugh that was more sneer than sound. Are we still on that? It wasn't just a party. It was my engagement, a once-in-a-lifetime event. I looked her in the eye and replied, "And Michael's funeral wasn't?" Her lips curled as she muttered, "People die every day. I'll only get engaged once." To which I shot back, "Actually, with your track record, you'll probably get engaged multiple times." Even my parents flinched at that, but Rachel flushed crimson, shouting, "How dare you!" I ignored her and turned to Jessica, who had begun to stammer. "Nina, we didn't mean—" But I cut her off too. "Yes, you did. Every word in that video was meant. Every laugh at my expense was real. This is who you are." I pulled out my phone, opened the video Timothy had sent, and pressed play. The sound of their mocking voices filling the room, each cruel sentence replaying their betrayal in surround sound. Jessica paled. My mother tried to sputter that it was out of context. My father folded his arms defensively, but I simply watched them squirm under the weight of their own words. When the video ended, I walked to my laptop and opened a folder I had created during Michael's hospice days, a folder titled Proof, where I had meticulously cataloged decades of slights, forgotten milestones, disparities, and patterns. "Do you want context?" I asked, spinning the laptop to face them. "Here's context. 28 years of birthdays where Rachel got jewelry and I got socks. Here's Christmas after Christmas where she unwrapped diamonds and I unwrapped kitchen gadgets. Here's my high school graduation you missed for her recital. My college graduation ignored while you applauded her internship. Here's every moment you reminded me I was second best. Every time you forgot me, dismissed me, diminished me." My mother scoffed. "You've been keeping score like a child." But I steadied my voice and said, "No, I've been keeping perspective. Because you've spent my whole life convincing me I was imagining it. This is the truth written in black and white." My father tried to pivot, insisting, "We are here, aren't we? We are your family." And I met his gaze and replied, "You are here with papers to cut me out of everything the day after my husband's funeral. That's not family, that's opportunism." Rachel threw up her hands, exasperated. "Can we just get this over with? Just sign the papers. It's not like you need the money with your husband's life insurance." The cruelty of that sentence sucked the air from the room, even my parents blinking at her audacity, and I felt something inside me snap, not into weakness, but into strength I hadn't known I possessed. I said, "Get out." My voice, trembling with rage, contained too long. "Get out of my house." My mother arose, her voice sharp. "Nina, don't be melodramatic. You'll regret this when the grief passes. You'll need us." And I interrupted with a shout that shook the walls. "I have been reasonable my entire life. I have been patient. I have been second best. I have swallowed every insult and endured every dismissal, but not anymore. Get out. From this moment forward, I have no family, no parents, no sister, no childhood friend. You are strangers to me now." My father sputtered about obligations, Rachel stormed to the door muttering that I was insane, and Jessica stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, begging, "Nina, please, don't throw away 20 years of friendship. I know I messed up, but I can fix this. I'll do anything." I looked at her, at the face of the girl who had once been my confidant, and realized that she had already thrown it away the moment she chose Rachel's champagne toast over my husband's funeral. "There's nothing to fix," I said flatly. "Leave." My mother grabbed my arm as she passed, hissing, "You'll regret this, Elizabeth." And I pulled free, saying the final severance, "Goodbye, Elizabeth," stripping her of the title of mother, watching her face crumple at the rejection. One by one they filed out, their absence this time a choice I had made, not one imposed on me. I collapsed against the door, sobbing until my body ached, but beneath the sorrow was a strange, fierce peace. For the first time, I had stood up for myself, defended the dignity Michael had always begged me to see in myself, and though I felt emptied, I also felt unshackled. That night, I called a grief therapist and booked an intake appointment. The next week, I walked nervously into a widow's support group and sat among strangers who understood the language of loss without needing translation. Sarah, who had lost her husband to a heart attack, taught me the one grown-up thing a day rule: shower, cook, walk. Tiny steps towards reclaiming life. Michael's parents became my lifeline. His mother sending me cookies, his father fixing the things in the apartment Michael once did, telling me, "You'll always be our daughter." Their kindness stood in contrast to the betrayal I had just cut out of my life. My parents left voicemails about moving forward as a family. Rachel sent a single text commanding me to apologize. Jessica mailed handwritten letters begging forgiveness. But I folded them into a box labeled past, because I finally understood that boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. 4 months later, when the apartment became unbearable, I sold it and moved into a smaller place across town, sunlight streaming through the windows, air that felt less haunted. While packing, I found a letter Michael had left in his nightstand, his handwriting shaky but clear. Use the strength you've always spent defending them to defend yourself, to thrive. I clutched that letter like a talisman, carrying it to therapy, to support group, to bureaucratic nightmares. And each time I read it, I believed him a little more. I began volunteering at the hospital chemo ward, sitting with patients through their treatments, offering presence I knew too well was needed. Elaine and Frank, who had lost their son to cancer, adopted me for Sunday dinners, showing me that family can be found in places you never expect. And slowly, very slowly, I began to breathe again. Not the shallow breaths of survival, but the deeper rhythm of someone daring to live. By the time the first anniversary of Michael's death arrived, I had stitched together a version of myself that was still fractured, but no longer shattered. A woman who could get up each morning, do her one grown-up thing, and sometimes even laugh without guilt. Though the grief never left, it simply wove itself into the fabric of who I was. Michael's parents came with me to Lake Michigan that day, and together we released part of his ashes into the water, the waves catching the blue-gray dust and folding him into their endless rhythm. His father said he would have loved this day, and his mother wrapped me in her arms, whispering, "He would be proud of how you've carried on," and I believed her, because I could feel it too, that Michael would never want my life to end just because his had. That night, back in my small apartment, I reread the letter he had left me, those trembling words urging me to use my strength for myself, and I promised him again that I would. Months passed and the seasons changed, and though the ache remained, I found new anchors, volunteering at the hospital's chemo ward, where my presence brought comfort to strangers fighting the same enemy that had taken Michael. Dinners with Elaine and Frank, the couple who had lost their son and adopted me into their Sundays. Blog posts I wrote late at night about grief and survival that reached people I would never meet, but who thanked me for speaking their pain. Life was still raw, but it was life, and that in itself was victory. My parents tried to reach me, sending voicemails about healing family rifts. My mother sending emails that veiled manipulation as concern. Rachel once demanding I apologize to fix things, and Jessica writing long letters full of regret. But I responded to none of them, placing every word into the box labeled past. Boundaries, my therapist reminded me, were not cruelty, but protection. And every day I grew more certain that cutting them off was not abandonment, but survival. When my lease ended, I sold the apartment that felt like a mausoleum and moved into a small house with sunlight and a garden where I planted tomatoes and marigolds, learning that coaxing life from soil could be its own kind of healing. On the second anniversary of Michael's death, I visited his grave alone, placing fresh flowers beside the simple headstone, and spoke to him out loud, no longer ashamed of talking to the air. 2 years, love. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like another lifetime, but I'm still here. I'm still building. As I sat on the bench I had installed, a familiar figure approached along the path. Jessica, holding a bouquet, her face older, stripped of its polished bravado, humility etched into her posture. She stopped when she saw me, hesitating, and said, "I can come back later." but I surprised myself by saying, "It's okay, put them down." She placed her flowers next to mine and admitted she visited each year, not to absolve herself, but to remind herself of her worst mistake. "It doesn't make up for missing the funeral," she said, her voice breaking, "but I wanted to pay my respects, to acknowledge him properly." For the first time in 2 years, I really looked at her, not as the friend who betrayed me, but as a flawed human who had lost her way. And I asked softly, "How have you been?" She told me she had been in therapy, had broken ties with Rachel after refusing to enable her anymore, had realized how toxic her own hunger for approval had made her. She confessed that losing my friendship had been the hardest consequence of her choices. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know I see now how badly I failed you." I studied her, searching for sincerity, and found it. I didn't offer forgiveness, but I didn't slam the door either. Instead, I said, "Thank you for saying that." And we talked for nearly an hour, catching up, acknowledging the past, leaving the door slightly ajar where once it had been sealed shut. That evening, I hosted dinner at my house for the family I had chosen. Sarah, from the support group, now a close friend, her boyfriend, Elaine and Frank, Susan and Richard, the colleagues who had carried me through the darkest days. We laughed, shared food, remembered Michael, and as I sat there surrounded by people who had shown up when it mattered, I felt something shift, a quiet joy blooming in the space grief had hollowed out. Later, under the stars in my garden, I whispered to Michael, "You were right about me. I am strong." And I felt the night air answer with a softness that wrapped around me like an embrace. In the months that followed, my life expanded in ways I hadn't thought possible. I was promoted at work, began teaching grief support workshops at the community center, and even started a small garden group with neighbors, discovering that community could be built in ordinary ways too. My mother still emailed occasionally, especially when she needed something, like when my father had a heart attack and they asked for help with medical bills, or when Rachel's engagement collapsed after her fiancé's law firm scandal, but I never answered directly. Once I sent them information about financial aid programs without a note, but otherwise I gave them nothing of myself. No access, no forgiveness, no re-entry into the fortress of peace I had built. For so long, I had believed family was something you had to endure, that blood was thicker than betrayal. But I had learned instead that family is the people who show up, who hold you through storms, who celebrate your joys without jealousy, who mourn your losses as if they were their own. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, that some bridges must stay burned, and that it's not cruelty to protect yourself from those who would destroy you. Most of all, I learned that resilience is not about never breaking, but about bending and still choosing to rise. On the 3rd anniversary of Michael's death, I returned to Lake Michigan, scattering the last of his ashes into the waves, watching the water carry him into infinity. I'm building the life you wanted for me, a life with love, with laughter, with people who see me. The wind caught my words and carried them out over the water, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt not only grief, but gratitude. Gratitude that I had been loved so well, that his belief in me had become my foundation, and that I had finally, painfully, beautifully learned to believe in myself. And if you are listening to my story now, if you are standing where I once stood, grieving, abandoned, wondering how you will survive, know this, you can. Healing is not fast, it is not easy, but it is possible. You will find people who become your true family. You will discover strength you didn't know you had. And you will learn that sometimes the greatest gift is not clinging to those who abandon you, but walking away to build something better.